Welcome back to BaldHeaded Metal, guys, and welcome back to another metal podcast we got here. The name is in the works. I have a couple ideas. I'm going to bounce off Andrew here as well, but we're still in the works of changing the name, see how it goes. But today I thought it'd be an interesting time to talk about our top 10 albums of the year in heavy metal. And we're going to go through a list 10 to 1, give a couple lines how we feel about each album, and just talk about year in metal at the end together. What do you think about that, Andrew? You ready for that?
Sounds like a fantastic idea, mate. Yes, indeed. And it's been such a great year in heavy metal. I don't know whether I could single out this year as being better than any other year, but there's just been so many wonderful releases this year that I know I'll be listening to for many years to come.
I have a couple that will be missing because there's a couple of bands I've discovered, and I know they're considered on many people's lists, like Gojira. I only got to into Gojira this year. Didn't get a chance to check it out. A couple albums as well, but I'll be interested to see how many of us ours crisscross, and I have a feeling a couple will, and perhaps a lot of them won't. I think
No doubt.
I'm gonna do the gentleman thing. I'm gonna let you start first.
Right, number 10 for me comes from my mate Bill Hudson in Northtail, Eternal Flame. Now, for those of you who don't know, Bill Hudson is a Brazilian national. No, actually, he's a naturalized citizen of the United States, but he's originally from Brazil, and he's one of the greatest guitarists of the modern era in heavy metal. I mean, he's a fellow that would surely be rewarded with global acclaim in an alternate universe that recognizes talent and perseverance over social media likability and edgy hot takes in 280 characters or less. Look, on Eternal Flame, it's an album that contains far too many highlights to pick, but there's some killer cuts such as Future Call, which features Kai Hansen and Kai Hansen's son. Now, Kai Hansen is from Gamma Ray and Halloween, and his son's name is Tim. And there's another tune on there which pays homage to vocalist Guilherme Hiros's religious philosophy called The Land of the Mystic Rites. Just a killer album, mate. Over to you. What's your number 10?
My number 10 is actually a very, very different genre, very different style, and that'd be Ministry's Moral Hygiene.
Mm.
Ministry, for those who are not aware, they've always been kind of at the forefront of that industrial metal sound with really crazy songs and such a charismatic frontman. I always forget his name, but he's such a charismatic frontman. He always has something to say.
Jorgensen, yeah.
Jorgensen, yeah. He always has something to say in his music. And he really brought it just again, kind of attacking KKK, attacking different types of things on this album. There's a couple of really good songs: Good Trouble, Sabotage, Sex, Disinformation. They've always been kind of doing the usual shtick, but I really love when the Ministry releases a new album because they always has. I'm not a big fan of industrial metal, and they're one of the only bands I can point a finger to and say that's good quality techno, trance, whatever you want to call it, all the electronic music mixed in with heavy metal.
Yeah, agreed. I had a conversation with Al a couple of years ago, and he'd had to be one of my favorite people in rock and metal. I've got to say, he's hilarious. He has an opinion on so many different things. You know, his political perspective, and he's written one of my favorite songs of all time, Paisley, which was from the Psalm 69 era, I think, if I got that right. Or no, it wasn't. Filth Pig, 1996, and it appeared on the Escape from LA soundtrack. So yeah, great choice, bro.
And I got into them with the Senor Peligro. What was the name of that album? It was one of their more thrashier albums, and that's one of the things I always liked, that they kind of fuse almost thrashy punk elements with that industrial sound. So back over to you. What's your number 9?
My number 9 made the cut. Brothers in Arms. Now, Jack Frost is a guitarist who's been developing his brand of hard rock and metal across too many groups to mention, but I'll mention a couple, such as Bronx Casket Company and Sabotage. But on Brothers in Arms, Sabotage, great band.
Great band.
I think, the key thing with Jack Frost is that his guitar performance has never relied on tried and tested tropes such as finger tapping and a warp speed playing. Instead, he shares like the same philosophy with J.K. Lee and Randy Rhoads, that less is more when it comes to blending techniques. And In this way, Frost's compositions, they never suffer due to an insistence on demonstrating technicality to satisfy the wankers in the guitar world brigade. Look, what he's done across Sunset and Clark, the debut, I suppose, from Brothers in Arms, is just blistering. Frost's performance, it identifies it as a killer album for all fans of guitar-dominant rock and metal music. But overall, I've got to say, the album isn't defined by great guitar playing because the songwriting is killer. There you go.
I would say simplicity definitely is something I talked about a couple of days ago, with this idea of sometimes you don't care how complex of a song structure or guitar playing somebody can do. It could just be boring to listen to. Yngwie Malmsteen is a great example. Even I would say Joe Satriani, I respect him immensely as a guitarist, but as songwriting, I get bored very quickly with his music.
Oh, the worst is Steve Vai.
Steve Vai.
I
I like him the most out of those.
Oh, yeah, look, Yngwie, sure. Satch, sure. Look, I can see how they offer fans value for, those notes full of pages, etc. But Vai, I've seen him in concert and I just did not get it. I've got to say, he absolutely can, pull a sound out of a hairbrush. I get that, but he just doesn't have that all important songwriting thing. And Van Halen proved that if you're going to shred, know how to write a song. Ain't my opinion.
I agree with you, man. I agree. Mine is actually the only, that's not true. It's not the only power metal album, but it's a power metal band, Organ, with their album Final Days. I really, really like their sound. I can't say I'm an immense fan of this whole band as a whole. I don't know if you ever heard of them, but for some reason, I like their steampunk mixed in with kind of almost like cheesy power metal lyrics. They don't take themselves overly seriously, but their music is so melodic, such fun riffs. It's one of those albums that is just fun to listen to, especially with songs like Heart of an Android and In the Dawn of the AI. They're just really fun choruses. It brings me back to like the 80s Merciful Fate or King Diamond and
Nice.
Judas Priest, all these kinds of old school bands who were just fun to listen to. They didn't take themselves overly serious as artists, as musicians. They played well, they had good music, but it maintained that fun element, which I have to say with some hair metal bands, I think that was the biggest draw with them, like the good ones, Def Leppard. I think Def Leppard just had fun music to listen to and in a good way. And then there's, Poison, Motley Crue, and all this other shit there.
Yeah, they did. And just to echo what we were talking about a moment ago, they knew how to write a song. Phil Collen knows how to write a song with Def Leppard. Good guy, too. I've had a chat with him. And look, some of their stuff's a bit soft, isn't it? But overall, I've never listened to a Def Leppard tune and say these guys don't know how to write a song, or they're not trying to take songwriting in a direction that demonstrate that they know how to articulate what they're trying to do with songwriting,
100%
and
agree.
yeah, but that's interesting. I'll have to check out that band actually that you mentioned there. So look, my number 8 belongs to Daniel Eliasson and his Merry Men in Norwegian death metal supremos Blood Red Throne. Imperial Congregation is the name of their album. Look, if you love death metal, you have to check out what Daniel and has done across Imperial Congregation. There are some seriously heavy flexes across this one, and not just through the blisteringly fast-picked guitar passages, superb solos. Check out Eliasson's solo on the cut 6 and 7, and drummer Freddie Bolso's rhythmic hammer, or the titanium heavy riffs. There's some great lyrics from vocalist Yngwie Christensen. There's a bit of a rail there against, human beings, the way we've been systematically deprived of individual freedom through these COVID-19 lockdowns. And so, in these times, death metal, it's an elixir. And listening to a group like an album like Imperial Congregation with a set of headphones, it won't solve your problems, but it sure bloody helps.
It softens the blow.
Indeed. There you go.
See, when I said I lied about 2 power metal albums, I have 2 power metal albums back to back. And this comes from a band from India, Kryps. I don't know if you ever heard of these guys, with their album Force of Danger.
Well, okay. Yep.
I really liked Kryps. First of all, Kryps older albums are some of my favorites in the genre. It's like a Judas Priest, very Judas Priest style of singing with growling. And their latest album kind of really leans into that 80s and even like 70s style music really hard. Now, perhaps why it's so far down on the list, it's not anywhere near, number one, is because I don't particularly like the direction they're taking their album with. They're taking a little bit more in the 80s. And I'm not a nostalgic person. I tend to look to the future. So despite the fact that I thought the music is great, the way it's written, the way it's played, I do get tired of that older style where it's a lot more minimalistic. And when I say we talk about more is less, I understand that concept, but I mean, it's very simple. It's almost like round and round. It's a quite of a simple song. And knowing what they're capable of as a band was a little bit disappointing to me, but it intuited its way into the top 10 for me. Very melodic, very old school. If you like that kind of stuff, if you want to have a dose of old school for you, and you'll close your eyes and you'll think you're back in the 80s with this album. I highly recommend checking out Kryps, their album Force of Danger.
Kryps, yeah, an emerging heavy metal superpower, a bit like their economy is India, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so many great bands coming out of the subcontinent, and that's just such a good example there that you're sharing with people. I love getting behind bands that are coming out of places that you would never necessarily associate with heavy metal.
Yeah.
All right, next one for me is, now I'm going to go for a bit of a longer one here. I'm going to stand on my soapbox a little bit. Okay. Massacre with Resurgence. Yeah. Well, Cam Lee. Okay, so I've had a long conversation recently with Cam Lee that people can check out on my YouTube channel. Look, the thing about death metal is it can resemble a loose coalition of underground musicians that, look, they often fall out, they occasionally regroup, but usually they're offering fans of the dissonant arts new and exciting sounds in which to wrap their ears around. Cam Lee covers all of those bases. And on Resurgence, he's not so much regrouped Massacre as he has reforged the band in his image with his vision intact, because he started almost 40 years ago. And that's the point I want to address, okay? Cam Lee deserves to be considered, if not the founding father, a founding father of death metal. Look, I get it, fans, we talk about these things in chats, in Facebook forums or what have you, but look, we'll never likely agree on just who it was that brought the death metal vocal style to a broader audience. But look, Lee must be credited for inspiring Chuck Schuldiner. Everybody knows who he is listening to this, no doubt, and watching this, no doubt. Long the genre's patron saint on those Death and Mantis rehearsal tapes way back in the very early 80s. This is undisputable, it was Cam Lee who took what Possessed and other budding extreme acts were doing over the line to a place where death grunts, growls and roars, they were the absolute norm and not just added for effect. So I won't go into a deeper history lesson than that. As I say, people can do their own research, and we all know who Chuck Schuldiner is. But do have a listen to my conversation with Lee anyway, because he goes, as I say, very deep into that side of the emergence of death metal way back in the 80s. But about the album, Resurgence is actually the natural successor to the 1986 written yet 1991 released classic album From Beyond. Everybody's got to have that if you love death metal. Look, on Resurgence, I think Lee has drawn a superb cast of musicians capable of realising his vision, including this epoch's hidden master of death grind, memoriam guitarist Scotty Fairfax, and Lee's lyrics dive into Lovecraft territory. The album's definitely a banger. There's no doubt about that, of course, otherwise it wouldn't make my list. But I think its place will be best seen in hindsight as the album that has helped Cam Lee continue his mission as a death metal original, someone who's far more important than an artifact or a relic confined to notes in Death's entry on Wikipedia. Look, I just hope for Cam's, it's not for Cam's sake, but I want Cam to succeed. I want Resurgence to be the springboard for him for many more releases in the years to come. So there you go.
I think that's been a big thing in the last 10 years. We've seen a lot of veterans come back and form bands and just completely annihilate and create albums and show these young guys how it's done. And like, for me, it was Annihilated. They came out of retirement back in 2010, thrash metal, and really just kind of killed. So I see where you're coming from. I never got into Massacre myself. Tried a couple times. Maybe it's time for me to try it again and see if I can kind of get
Listen to
into
this
that.
album. I think this one is. There's no doubt it's death metal, but there's doses of melody throughout it, and Cam's vocal style is it's unique, and it's brutal, but at the same time, it's very listenable. Okay,
Right.
so if you're sort of on the periphery of whether or not you actually care about listening to death metal and grind, just check out Resurgence. It's definitely worth it. I mean, what's it worth? You can go onto Spotify, these things, and stream any album in history.
Yeah.
Give it 5 to 10 minutes or so. To anybody out there who wants to check out, in my opinion, a fellow who deserves to be credited at least one on the dais as one of the 3 founding fathers of the genre of death metal.
It was very interesting. There was, before I move on to my number 7, there was one documentary I heard talking about that one of the earliest sounds of death metal, and it wasn't death metal obviously, but the sound of it was early Sepultura, when they were doing,
I absolutely agree.
like Beneath the Remains, Schizophrenia. It was like the beginnings of it, and later on bands took that sound and just really elevated it to a whole different kind of plank.
Look, Brazil and South America in general does not get its due credit.
I agree.
Regarding the very early days of extreme metal. I mean, those were tapes. Max Cavalera was trading tapes and sending as a pen pal with Chuck Schuldiner back in the day. God knows how many people from Europe as well that were starting extreme metal bands. Max Cavalera, I've spoken to him about this very topic. I said, you don't get mentioned when people start.
Agree.
Yeah, everybody's talking about Jeff Becerra from Possessed and other people that come up, and I'm thinking, you like talking about the late 80s sometimes when they're talking about founding fathers. You've got to go back to the very early 80s. Okay, I'm going to get the name of the band wrong, I think, but is it Sarcophago? Might have been from.
Oh yeah, from Brazil. I know you're talking about.
Yeah. They're even before Max and the very early Sepultura, and they are identifiably extreme for that era, like Venom or what have you, But yeah, South America, man. I mean, I wish someone would do a documentary on all of the great bands that were in Sao Paulo, and
that there's no argument, man. 100% agree with you. Which you mentioned death metal, and when a little bit of me, like my metal elitist, like, wait a minute, when you said like, well, if you're on the fence about death metal, I'm like, what do you mean if I think I like death metal? And then here we go, a death metal record for you. Just discovered this band this year, Aborted. I checked out their new album, nice. Mania Cult. Fantastic, like technical, even melodic death metal record. And it's my first one getting into this band. From what I heard, they have a very legendary status. I believe they are French. I am correct.
Belgium.
They're from Belgium. They had this album, Mania Cult, Portal to Vacuity and Dementophobia, Vulgar Quagmire. There's so many songs on this album that display this absolute technicality without ever being overboard. It's just enough brutal. It's just enough melodic. It's production-wise, like you can hear every single cymbal on the drums, every single string on the guitar. I thought it was just phenomenally made album. And that's me having zero experience with this band. I'm now excited to actually jump into their whole discography, as a matter of fact. And that would definitely be my number 7 for this year.
Yeah, they do some interesting things. For the podcast, I've had a chat with Swen, the singer, and they were, I don't know whether they pioneered this sort of stuff, but all this interesting merch. So say, for example, they were selling a blanket at one stage with a bordered on it, a popcorn container. They do all sorts of shit. I think you can go across to their website or their Bandcamp site and just check it all out. But to your point, man, yeah, great album. And just to give you an idea how many killer albums are out this year, I didn't even know that they bloody had one. But there you go. Yeah. I mean, we can't keep across everything, can we? But on that note, how can I go past the German masters themselves, Helloween, with their self-titled album?
I knew this was coming.
Yeah, it should really be higher up the list, but I can't fit everything in. Look, I'll just loosely say that my top 10, they're all, except for number one, which is a standout number one, from 2 down to 10, they're all more or less even. They're all part of the top 10, not necessarily in an order. I'm just sort of reading them out in this order because we have to.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
look,
yeah.
Halloween, these guys, these German heavy metal maestros, look, they've never had a low ebb, have they, across their vaunted career? But this album still feels like a bit of a comeback, and I think the answer's found in the return of long departed vocalist and guitarist. I've already mentioned him, the legend, Kai Hansen, and his vocal replacement in Halloween, Michael Kiske, who's also long departed, but they've now both returned. So the group now has 3 world-class vocalists. Andy Derris is the fellow that's been in the group since 1992 or thereabouts. So they've retained Andy, and they've got Kai, and they've got Michael. They're all notable pillars of the rich tradition of German heavy metal, and it's terrific that each of them, and here's the key here with this album, they were willing to set aside the trappings of their ego to ensure that the new album from Halloween was far more than a blast from the past. I've got to say, mate, I think that as an album, Halloween, it's a rich and vital album that could set the band up for decades. It's just going to be Father Time that stops these guys. Look, at this stage, courtesy of the quality of the album, and almost every album that this group has ever released, it's only a matter of time, in my humble opinion, that the group becomes a colossus mentioned in the same breath as Judas Priest and Iron Maiden. My opinion, hey, you know I'm known for my hot takes.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
they're better than Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, frankly.
I mean, you know what it is? I always understood some of these points of views where somebody will say, I feel this band is better. And we're all 100% because there's so much talent out there. There's so many bands. It's just sometimes it's luck. Even Metallica will admit that there's a moment of luck for them. They Overkill or, Anthrax and all these other bands, they could have easily, Testament, just been on the same level as Metallica. It's just they got lucky. They were there at the right time with the right people, with the right producer, and they've kind of
Mm-hmm.
exploded. But for me, next one for me, number 6, is a very weird one because I did not expect it to be. I didn't know anything about this band. It's not even a full album, it's an EP, and that's from the band Orbit Culture with their EP Shaman.
Mm-hmm.
And I say it's a weird one because I don't like any kind of metalcore elements with that.
Yeah.
It has a very kind of weird production. It has this metallic sound, like a post-production to it. But for some reason, I just absolutely resonated with this Swedish metal band, with their song Fight of the Fireflies, especially their song Carvings, having this kind of a very primordial and shamanistic kind of feel to it. Strangle, I thought it was a great EP. It's not as good. I thought their EP now is actually better than their earlier work, personally. And it's not something about it. It's not very complex songwriting, but just it has that guttural emotional punch
Mm-hmm.
it's hard sometimes to put in words. I highly recommend, like you said, Spotify. I highly recommend you guys, if you want to check out something a little different that doesn't sound like everybody else, that has its own unique sound, I highly recommend to check out Shaman by Orbit Culture.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I'm totally with you on the metalcore thing. I'm on the fence about it. I do play a lot of it on my show because I know a lot of the listeners to my podcast do like metalcore. It'll never be a genre that I naturally gravitate toward. But hey, let's face it, there are killer albums, or EPs in this case, that pop up from time to time, like this one here. And great heavy metal music, regardless of the genre, is still great heavy metal music.
Exactly.
So well done for picking something outside of your normal listening habits.
Lamb of God was one that took me a long time. I did not dig him
Oh
for a very
God,
long
yeah.
time. And there's a couple of albums I just really like.
Wonderful musicians, some of the just killer guitarists in that group, I've got to say, with Lamb of God. Yeah, but never my thing either. And I saw them with Metallica, actually, when Metallica toured Australia in 2010, and I thought they were a better band than Metallica even back then, but that's not hard these days, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Given Lars Ulrich's drumming, or old Lars,
Yeah.
All right, so what have I allocated to number 5? But as I say, I'm sort of just grouping 2 to 10 together. But Carcass, they're back. Yeah, no, I think we'll have this one in common. Torn Arteries. Now, I've got to say, one of the more unusual and surreal interview experiences that I've ever had featured bassist and vocalist Jeff Walker. Look, he'll tell you that he doesn't know the fans, especially indie podcasters like me, emphatically praising his latest release as I was a goddamn thing, and he's right, you know, but for what it's worth, I think he should be a little bit more receptive to praise than he is to trying to finish an interview and go and sip on a freshly brewed cup of tea, which is basically what he told me he wanted to do. But look, I said to him, I'll share this story. I said to Jeff in the conversation, I opened it up, I said, look, you've got to be thrilled with the quality of Torn Arteries. He said, no, he wasn't. And he added words to the effect that the question implied that I was somewhat overstating the significance of the album. Look at this stage. I just think he was over being interviewed, but that's cool. He's a human being. He's allowed to have he's allowed to not be into being interviewed. That's okay. But look, I think as far as Carcass is concerned, at this stage in their career, they deserve every single accolade sent their way. And based on the merit of Torn Arteries, check it out, please check it out. It's mining the same, and as an album, it's mining the same fertile musical tillage the group has sporadically released since the 1993 Monolith Heartwork, and of course, one of the greatest guitarists in extreme metal history, the supreme and influential Bill Steer. His guitar work, unbelievable across this album here. One of the guitar, if not the guitar performance of the year, it's one of the guitar performances of the year.
All righty. So my next one is not Carcass Torn Arteries, but it's, I told you how much I love thrash metal. So I have to include some thrash metal in this list, and that's from Evil, English band with their album Hell Unleashed. They came out, I always liked this band, all right? I always enjoyed what they released, and I thought were great records, but they never really stood out for me in that kind of way. And then they released Hell Unleashed, and I heard this buzz around the album, checked it out, literally blew my face away. I could not believe the style and the energy of this thrash metal record, with songs like Paralyzed and Incarcerated. War of Attrition is like one of my favorite songs of the year. They just came out with this, I don't know, just pure thrash aggression. And now their guitarist is now their new vocalist. So the vocals are switched up a little bit different. I just think it's an absolutely fantastic record. It deserves all the accolades it's been getting throughout the year as one of the better albums of the year overall. Thrash metal is not getting enough love nowadays because it's not a genre that is that popular anymore. It's kind of past its prime a little bit, but it's always close and dear to my heart because basically all my favorite bands either include thrash elements or are thrash bands, because I think they have a perfect blend. Thrash has a perfect blend of aggression and message mixed in with intricacy and melodies. At least that's how I feel.
Yeah, and another band who I didn't realize had a new album out this year. Like, gosh, there's just so many of them. And to your point, yeah, I think thrash is a little bit down the list these days. I mean, there are the leading lights like the Testaments, and we'll get to Exodus. Don't worry about that. They're sort of out there. But yeah, I wonder how many other thrash groups have got killer new albums out in this day and age. And yeah, well articulated there, my friend, on why you like the album. And so I'll move on to my next one. Now, here's a band that I know hardly anybody, if anybody at all, will have heard of. Shotgun Mistress. They're an Australian outfit. Yeah. You will have heard of some of the bands I'm going to mention, though, that their guitarist plays in or has played in. So Shotgun Mistress is what you get when you get an incredibly adept extreme metal guitarist when they turn their hand to riff rock. Think of bands like, oh God, it's going to Airborne. Almost lost it. But caught it, brought it back. Airborne. Victorian. My mate from Victoria, Matt Wilcock. Look, he's an unsung hero of powerful metal guitar performance, and he has had a career that reads like a Spotify playlist of your favorite late night beer and God knows what other substance imbibing relaxation accompaniments, because Wilcock's guitar playing can be heard on recordings from internationally acclaimed groups such as Akercocker, The Berserker, Werewolves of Bremelin, and Antichrist in Imperium. So look, across their self-titled album, Shotgun Mistress, Wilcock brings the same white-knuckle intensity to rock music as he does to extreme metal. And with this band, Shotgun Mistress, he is surrounded by a killer band. Look, 13, it's an unlucky number for most, yet this group has conjured as many tracks on their album, their debut EP, and left plenty of room for fans of no bullshit, fall to the floor, rock and metal to clamour for more.
Alrighty. No, yeah, never heard of this band. But like you said, there's so much out there. That's the beautiful thing about it. When I do from time to time, I have a yearning for new bands. You're always going to find something new, something different. Just this year, thanks to the channel, I've discovered so many different bands, which I'll get to actually mention a little bit further down the list. For example, Orbit Culture entered there, Aborted, and they all entered there through recommendations. And I was able to kind of discover them and what they're all about. And now I'm absolutely in love with the band and a fan. So I think it speaks to just how much good material comes out every single year. We just can't grasp all of it. We only have so much attention and time.
Yeah, indeed.
But now I did hear what you were talking about Iron Maiden here, but you know what? I'm including the Iron Maiden's album Senjutsu. I think it's a fantastic album. Yes, it's an hour and 22 minutes, but man, I was in love with this album. I listened to it twice in a row. That's how much I loved it. And I know people complain about the last three songs, Death with the Celts, The Parchment, and Hell on Earth, as being too long. I loved every single second of it, and I thought each one was too short. And that's kind of, again, the difference in opinion comes into play, right? I don't know. They're not innovating the genre. They're not setting a new standard. Like Brave New World, I remember like, whoa, it kind of showed everybody Iron Man still got it. Yes, it doesn't have that same level of Brave New World or their older records, but it's just a fantastic new wave of British heavy metal record. It's a fantastic new Iron Maiden album. It's really great music that you're not going to hear anywhere else because it's in the style of Iron Maiden. How many bands have been inspired by these guys? How many people try to copy them? And they just still come out and they still got the fire inside going in their late 60s. So I thought it was a great album. Loved it beginning to the end.
I think I've just listened to so much Iron Maiden, especially when I was growing up. I'm just inoculated against them at this point in time. It's not that I don't love the band dearly, and whole decades of my life, God, I'm 43, but from teenage years, 20s, and my 20s. This is when they were uncool, by the way. So this is like the late 90s, early 2000s, before they truly came back into the public domain as a beloved band by all. Even the Rolling Stone or Pitchfork has given this new album a glowing review, which is strange because Rolling Stone is one of those, I hate it, to be honest with you, except there's a couple of good writers there. One of your fellow New Yorkers there, Hank Steen, a good bloke. I've had a chat to him, and he's a genuine fan of rock and metal. But they tend to do these edgy hot takes and take down rock and metal bands, and they didn't do it with this new album from Iron Maiden. So, no, I just haven't listened to it yet, admittedly, because, as I say, I'm just inoculated against the group, but a great pick from yourself.
I hear you, though. I hear you.
Okay, the next one. Now, this is where shit starts to get real because I'm talking about Exodus, Persona non grata.
My man.
Okay. Whoa. My God. I don't know. How do they do it? Seriously.
They're just getting better, aren't they?
Yeah, I know. I mean, look, this is a band that's armed and dangerous, and they've just delivered one of the best albums of their storied career. Look, Persona non grata, the only way to describe it is it's vicious. It's an old-fashioned knock 'em down, kill 'em all, take no prisoners, go and fuck yourself, thrash metal extravaganza that only, and here's the key point here, only the musicians who are there to play a role in the emergence of the world-domineering, the world-beating Bay Area thrash, that whole scene, could conjure. Okay. Look, this far into the group's career, so well over 35 years, and God knows how many albums, I haven't counted them all, but look, there's no way anybody could have predicted that their music would be heavier now and faster. And here's the key point for me, that not only the albums within their own catalogue, but almost every other band who sit adjacent in the pantheon of all-time heavy metal greats. I can't say enough positive things about Persona non grata, but it's not about thrash, it's about, if you're a fan of heavy metal, get to it. It's there.
I 100% agree. And I think it's a little bit with Steve's vocals, it's easier to get into for those who are not keen on harsher style of vocals, because Rob Dukes could be a little bit off-putting for some people. He's a little rougher around their edges. I personally like him. I like both of them equally. But I can, with this album and Steve's performance, and I would say he shows more vocal range in this album.
Yeah, I would too. Yeah, there are modern recording techniques, I think, but I mean, how old are they? 58, 59 or something, or late 50s anyway. I mean, they shouldn't be sounding this vital and vicious.
I agree.
But they are. I mean, the poor old drummer, what's his name? Hunting, is it?
Tom Hunting.
Tom Hunting just came out of ICU, but this in the past sort of 6 to 12 months to record the album, I think. Or did he go into ICU through COVID because of COVID after or before? Either way, the point is that there's no way I would have predicted, as I say, at this point in time, that they'd probably be my pick of all of the thrash bands ever. Them and Testament, at the very least. And I just, a bit like Massacre and Cam Lee, it just sets them up. This album, it's as great an album as it is. I'm really looking forward to where they go next.
I agree with you, man. And now I think the list is going to become very repetitive here because my number 3 is Carcass, Torn Arteries. I put it a little bit higher on the list because Hard Work is a special album for me. I think Hard Work should be on every top 10, top 100, whatever one the top middle is, but it should be like a staple, stuck on sticker that never goes anywhere as one of the greatest metal records ever recorded. And in many ways, I thought Torn Arteries was even better because they stepped out of their comfort zone, something I want to kind of express. They stepped out of their comfort zone of how they write music. It's Carcass. You can hear it's Carcass, but it sounds different. And how can you, when they're that, they're older now, they still have the inspiration to write different and write really like Eleanor's Rigor Mortis, Onto the Scalpel Blade, The Devil, right? Like every song in this album, for the exception of Dance of Hitab, I wasn't a big fan, and Kelly's Meat Emporium, they didn't really resonate with me. Every other song was so good, it didn't even matter. And for me, it was an instant. Like as soon as I finished listening to the album, I'm like, oh yeah, this is top 10. I don't even have to make a list. I know it's one of the top 10 right off the bat.
I felt the same way, actually. Yeah, and I agree with you too about the 2 singles, so the YouTube clips that they had out. I think the best songs for me for Carcass were always deep cuts, and a good example of that would have to be In God We Trust, because it's just got Bill Steers. I've already gushed about his guitar playing, but that extended slinky guitar solo. I don't know whether you heard, but there's hand claps on that song.
No,
we
talked
about that with Bill.
Didn't pay attention.
Check it out. Yeah, they're sort of, that's, what do they call it? Easter eggs or what have you, buried deep underneath. But there's these hand claps, and Bill or Jeff, I can't remember, one of the 2 told me that they copped a bit of shit from it from interviewers, and I thought if people haven't these guys are British pranksters, right? The guys in Carcass, and they're always going to do stuff like that, and more power to them.
I always thought it was really funny. A lot of time I saw a documentary with Sam Dunn where he's talking about Carcass and how much he loves them. And he's like, oh yeah, a lot of people misunderstand our lyrics. They thought we were like Satanists and wanted to do violence. Like, oh, we're vegans. It's about veganism. It's like people don't understand the lyrics. So we just wanted to go as ridiculous and as crazy as possible.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, no, good pick, man. And look, the next one for me is a band that I hadn't heard of prior to being given an opportunity to have a chat to them. Band from Denmark. So we're getting very serious now because I'm at number 2, and they're called Mol. Now it's spelt M-O-L, but the O with the slash through it. Yeah.
Norwegian or
Danish? Yeah, but Danish. Norwegian, similar. Jason, similar. Not alphabet, we'll share an alphabet, but like they use that O with the cross through it, so it's not mole, it's Mol. But an album called Diorama. Now, Diorama is the meeting point between Norwegian black metal, British shoegaze, and more complicated indie stuff like Gang of Four. And look, this band have an incredibly bright future ahead. They're only very young; they're in their early or mid-20s, and they, in this day and age, when Deaf Heaven, a band I also love, have basically turned into, which is no problem, by the way, they can on their recent album, a version of The Smiths. There's a crow outside my door there. They've some like a more updated version of The Smiths, and they've basically left their metal sounds behind. But if you love Sunbather from Deaf Heaven, you're going to love what the band is doing here across Diorama. Why do I like it? Okay, so there's a dynamic duo of Kim Song Sternkopf, he's the vocalist, and guitar engineer Nikolai Hansen. Now, I'm a huge fan of gnarly guitar performance, and Hansen has managed to capture a guitar tone reminiscent of Johnny Marr from the Smiths that is most ethereal, and then blend it with some seriously fucked up, warped, down and dirty, blackened thrash that'll have the naysayers ducking for cover. And Sternkopf too, my gosh, his vocal technique, it's lung busting. It must be equal parts technique and physical agony to recreate on stage. So I can't wait to see them live, because they've got some videos out there, and yeah, it looks tough. Now, you won't appreciate Diorama, I think, as quickly as many other albums that we've already discussed, but it's a good old-fashioned grower, which means that you'll be listening to it for many more years to come, and not just until the end of next Wednesday.
Yeah, I think that's something to take into account. When I was doing reactions for some songs and albums, people would react very viscerally, and I'm like, guys, some things tend time to grow, but in the moment you might not like it. I can name you so many. I didn't like Symbolic from Death when I first heard it.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, that's just how it is. And then for some reason, and I think it was because my brother was putting it on all the time, and I kept hearing it, and I'm like, I'm fucking done with this. And then when I came back to it on my own, and I heard the first song was Without Judgment, I was like, whoa, okay, I need to listen to this whole thing. And then Zero Tolerance, Crystal Mountain, and everything. It's like, my God, is this album good? Yeah. Right away, Sound of Perseverance, I was blown away. So I know what you mean. Growers sometimes are the best albums for us. They take the longest, and they cement to be the best sometimes, right?
Indeed. I love it. Yeah. That's why I made it number 2, is because I tend to, that couch that's just behind me there, you know, when I've had enough of work and the kids yelling at me because they're on school holidays these days and all the rest of it, it's an album that I put on my headphones, and just I can see the sky out here beyond the banana tree, and I just look in the great beyond, and I have Moore's Diorama on, and it takes me somewhere else. It's a grower.
Well, for me, the one that definitely took me somewhere else on my number 2 is Exodus, Persona Non Grata, because Exodus is my favorite thrash metal band of all time, my number 2 band of all time. So it's already, my anticipation for this album was super high. I discovered Exodus from Temple of the Damned. So I discovered them in their resurgence with Steve, and then Rob Dukes in an album after that with the Shovelhead Kill Machine. So I've been just a huge fan. My first concert I've ever been to, my first mosh pit I've ever been to. I have a lot of sweet spots for this band, but holy smokes, I did not expect, just like you, for guys who are grandpas at this point, to release an album that's this aggressive, this fast, and at the same time tries things. It doesn't just do the same shit on every single song. Every song, Persona Non Grata, slipping into madness with that old school chorus that they have, prescribing horror, fantastic. I have that song on repeat all the time. The clickbait, Lunatic Liar Lord, like everything on this album for me, it just right away resonated with me. And it's through and through, like you said, Bay Area thrash at its best. The only band that's in that Bay Area or that style of American thrash metal that's still out there, I would only put maybe Testament and Overkill next to them. That's about it.
That's it.
Everybody else is kind of, they're done. They're not doing the same things anymore. And that was just a fantastic. I couldn't have been happier. Only 2 songs. Again, Elitist and what was the other one? The Years of Death and Dying. Wasn't a huge fan. But again, it doesn't stop me from putting this so high on my list because of how much more I like all the other songs. For me, it's rare to like every single song on an album. I tend to be quite picky myself.
Yeah, good call. I don't know. Again, you got to assume that people listening are as near to knowledgeable as what we are, if not more knowledgeable about heavy metal. And I mean, it's an album that if you consider yourself a dyed-in-the-wool fan of heavy metal, get listening, because you won't hear a better certainly a better thrash metal album released in the last 5 years or so, outside of an album from Testament. Totally with you there on, you know, the Overkill, Testament, and Exodus, mate. I mean, realistically, you're good to go. If all you do is listen to those 3, they'll satisfy your thrash cravings.
100%.
So this is where it doesn't just get real, but it goes beyond the bounds of real, because we're in the number 1 spot for me. And this, as I said, is an album that took me completely by surprise. I've mentioned it in other conversations that we've had. But here we are, Leviathan Project, Sound of Galaxies. Okay. Look, on Sound of Galaxies, Leviathan project, they combine the aesthetic of old school speed and thrash metal, traditional heavy metal, FM radio rock sensibility, and they've got this otherworldly, this ethereal cosmic quality that many bands embrace, yet few execute with the same prowess. This is a group that's the brainchild of Tommy Crash, who was in a blinking new mist version of Britney Fox, and a fella who I'd never heard of before. I think he's relatively unknown. His name's Matt Nardo, but he's a seasoned studio pro. Look, the quality of this group's tunes meant that they could wrangle ex-Judas Priest frontman Tim Ripper Owens to sing. And we've already talked about Death and Symbolic, but one of the guitarists on that album, Bobby Cobley, to handle all lead guitar duties. So, look, why it's number one for me is because if the lineup on the album sounds like it could be something close to an all-star gathering, which, to be perfectly frank, could have meant that it was a case of too many cooks in the kitchen, then it's remarkable that it's an album that it sounds greater than the sum of its very impressive parts. Tim Ripper Owens, take a bow, sir, because you are in career best form. Have a listen to cuts Solar Storm, Leviathan, and hey, and more edgy hot takes from me here. The Maiden beating Edge of Time. And look, Bobby Cobley unlocks the mystery that old school death metal fans like myself were quietly asking, which was his contribution to Death and Symbolic essential or even relevant. He's been out of the spotlight for decades, but look, his lead breaks on this album and solos answer the question emphatically by revealing a brilliant soloist who is equal parts a gnarly shredder and a breezy note bender who can squeeze every drop of power from deceptively simple arcs and fans of the fretboard. I've had a couple of conversations with Tommy. He's a good bloke, and we've covered all manner of musical terrain. I just wanted to try to get to the bottom of why this unassuming fella from Florida has managed to create, in my opinion, one of the more essential heavy metal releases of the decade. And look, I came away from both conversations thinking that Eddie Van Halen, the most critically important and innovative guitarist of our lifetime, he got it right. Van Halen mentioned something along the lines of music acting as a powerful sedative, a powerful summoning. That creation lies somewhere beyond consciousness. It's just out of reach for most, yet for a precious few, it's within their grasp. And Crash is one of those fellas who can tap into that musical cosmos of sounds. I just so thankful of the God force that is out there, that Divinity saw Crash worthy of partnering with Nardo and then attracting Ripper and Bobby Cobley within his musical orbit, because Sound of Galaxies is as good as it gets. It's certainly one of my, if I had to pick an album that could potentially be my favorite metal album of the last decade, I think I'd probably pick this one.
Whoa, okay. Yeah, that's high praise. And I told you how I had a completely 180 reaction from it, which is, again, the most wonderful and interesting thing is how different of opinions. And for me is, I thought I should tip my hat to your fellow friends from Australia, Bellacor, on the last one. A band that I discovered through this channel and resonated from the first song. Coherence, their album is one of a kind, I think. It's a band, for me, this album is the same thing in this melodic death metal. It gave me that same feeling for the first time when I heard Sound of Perseverance or Symbolic and really fell in love with it. It's that good. There's so much inspiration in it. There's so many different elements in it. The song Hidden Window or Sweep of Days, Valiance, for every single song on this album, with each song, I did like a whole album reaction. With each song, I fell in love with the album more and more and more, and I couldn't believe how good it was. And I would say the same thing. Probably the best discovery I could have had in the decade is most likely Bellacor. They're just that good. And they're just really coming out of the shadow because their first two albums weren't very well produced, self-produced albums, doing their best, and their sound is still being developed. And now these past two albums that they released are just like, whoa, just on a different level, I believe. And it's an absolute, for me to put an album above Exodus is a big one. And I, without a doubt, without thinking, I put it above Exodus as just being flawless. I thought it was a flawless album.
There you go. I'm yet to check it out, admittedly. I know you've talked about it a few times, but there is so much great metal coming out of Australia at the moment. I don't know. I look forward to what's going to come out of, I think they're from Victoria.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the Victorian capital, Melbourne. I look forward to seeing what comes out of Melbourne because those guys have been locked down for almost forever. And, there's a lot of frustration. And I can tell the difference at the moment when I talk to my fellow Aussies, people who are from Melbourne, because they've got the shits and they're just beaten down.
Yeah, yeah.
And in a way, everything else considered, okay, just talking about the music here, people are going to want to release stress and frustration through, if you're creative, through great heavy metal, I think. And so the next few years, I think, are going to be very interesting. But Bellacor, man, killer band. I've heard some of their stuff, but I just haven't heard this recent album.
And what I would like to say, how we can close up this whole podcast today is thoughts. And I have a feeling I'm going to say something, despite some of the things I said throughout the podcast, it's going to be a very different point. Is a closing statement on this year for you for heavy metal, and maybe some outlook or something that you might be looking forward to, an album of somebody. How would you like to close it up?
Wow, on the spot. How would I close it out? Look, 2021, I kind of have already said it. Is it a year like any other? Not really. It's just another year. But every year we are blessed to be fans of great heavy metal with the amount that we can tap into and listen to in our streaming, at the end of our streaming service, fingertips on Spotify and Apple Music. I mean, just to go through some of the albums, just quickly to go through some of the albums that didn't make the grade for my top 10, but are still unbelievable albums in and of themselves. Suffocation, live in North America. Beast in Black, A Dark Connection. Ministry, Moral Hygiene, they are on your list there. Carnifex, Graveside Confessions. Fear Factory had a good one. Dino there with Aggression Continuum. Burning Witches, the ladies from Europe with Witch of the North. Pathology, great death metal. The Everlasting Plague, should I go on? I think everybody gets the idea. At this point in time, especially when you're listening to people who are knowledgeable like you and I, okay, where do we start with the bands that make our top 10? I mean, it's hard to sort of single it, bring it down to that list, which is why I tried not to make too much of a distinction between number 10 down to number 2 for me, because with recording techniques and the ability to be in bands with people across the globe, I even know people that have been in bands that have never spoken to each other before. They just send files across the web and create music via the cloud. People tend to be, you mentioned it, brother. I'm not nostalgic either. I'm not backward looking when it comes to heavy metal. I want to know what's coming out in the here and now, whether they're old bands, new bands, or bands that have been around for not too long. Okay. We have never lived in a time where we have access to so much great heavy metal. All I've got to say is get to it. Read the year-end lists from listen to our year-end lists and go and dive into some of those albums. Go and have a read of some of the other top 10 lists that are out there. You're going to find something that you enjoy that you've never heard of before. You've done it on this call here, mate, where you've mentioned some of those bands there. So I look forward to listening to some of them.
Well, I'm going to go a little bit different from you, despite saying that I think now is the best time for heavy metal, to discover heavy metal, listen to heavy metal. I thought this year for me was a weak year, personally speaking.
Okay.
I thought it was a weak year because for me, there could be albums I can put on the list and I can say that I liked, but the way Bellacor, Exodus, and Carcass made me feel, other albums didn't. They made me literally, when you had the hair on your arm stands up, when you cannot, you're like, what am I hearing right now? That moment where the light bulb lights up and the first time you hear Sepultura Beneath the Remains, Stronger Than Hate, and you're like, what is this? I've never heard this. That feeling, it's become less and less over time because there's so much more music being released. And it's been something that's been happening to me for the past couple of years, where with each year, I'm like, oh, that was cool. Oh, that was cool. I got my album from this band or this band, but overall it's been okay. And there's not a light disappointment. It's not, that's what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say here is, for some reason, I expected more from the bands that I love. That's all. I wanted to see some of the bands that I love. Melikash, Bolt Thrower, unfortunately broke apart, but there's other bands. So for me, I'm leaving this year a little bit wanting. knowing that I didn't check out albums. Obviously, I can't, like we said, we can't check out everything. And I have some homework to do. I'm gonna check out the new Epica. I'm gonna check out the new Gojira. I'm gonna check out a couple more other things there. But I am left wanting more going into 2022. And I really hope that 2022 really has me just like absolutely just seated like this, just like blown away. Like could not believe how many albums I got from the bands that I love. So that's where I would leave my year in review.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, I went through a phase like that not a while ago. I've got to say, but then I think just with the interviews that I'm the opportunity to do the interviews that I do, it allows me to really dive deep in some of the albums. So I get this other perspective courtesy of the fact that I'm having conversations with these album creators, and I actually get into them that way, as opposed to just listening to them as standalone entities. So there are, I mean, here's another album that neither of us mentioned that could easily have made the top 10 and probably should have, for me, to be honest, is Cannibal Corpse, Violence Unimagined. Eric Rutan has made his debut as a full-time and tenured member of the band. Geez, I mean, I understand your perspective, and it's a worthy perspective. I just think it comes down to how many hours are there in the day.
Never been a big fan of Cannibal Corpse.
Really?
I tried many times, and they're not too extreme or anything like that for me. Just never resonated.
They were definitely one of the first ever bands, full stop, I got into as a young fella, way back when Chris Barnes was in the group, the Bleeding, and the Barnes era had its sound, and the Corpse Grinder era spans a lot longer, 80% of the band's history or longer, 85 I think at this point. But a bit like Exodus and Halloween, my comments there, I think that Violence Unimagined sets the band up for the next few decades, especially because they're not old, those guys. They're in their late 40s. So they've got many years ahead of them. There's also, there were some hidden gems too, like White Void, with Anti-Therion had Leviathan. I don't know, man. It's for me, honestly, mate, just with leading a busy life, it just comes down to how much time have I got to listen to music. Not a great deal these days, but I just try to give everything a bit of a go. And a bit like you, I do look for the hairs standing up on end, and I think my top 3 did it, and that's enough for me.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. But my brother, it's been a pleasure sharing our top 10 lists. Very, very different lists for the most part. We have very different lists here, but I'm going to leave you with that one, guys. I want to hear from you guys. What is your top 10 list for the year? Let us know down below in the comments what you think of our individual lists as well, what you can add, subtract. We all have different perspectives. And guys, make sure to check out Scars and Guitars podcast, Andrew's podcast, which is wonderful interviews all the time. You can't imagine how many interviews at this point that you have already that you've done.
Oh, about 610, I think I last counted.
Guys, go and do yourself a favor and check his channel out.
Thanks heaps for the props, brother. Yeah. Is this it? Is this our last episode for the year, or are we going to do another one after this?
Why not?
Okay. All right. Well, I won't wish you a Merry Christmas and all the rest of it just yet. I'll save that for the next one.
To you as well.
Thanks. Yeah. I enjoyed
you as well, my brother. You have a good one.
No worries. Thanks, brother.
Keep it metal.